They arrived in pairs like bad thoughts. 2 at the back gate, 2 through the orchard, 2 lifted from a cart under sacks of beets. By midnight, there were 12 pairs of foreign boots dripping river onto my stone floor. 12 faces trying to look smaller than they were. 12 breaths held at the same height, like boys at the edge of a pond the moment before they jump. The patrol had passed twice already that evening. I could still taste their exhaust in the kitchen curtains. Madam, I said, because names were cargo. You'll be straw-named later. I kept my voice low, the way you speak to Mares. One of the tall ones tried French and landed in Italian. I handed him bread. Bread is a language everybody remembers. In the doorway to the pantry, my daughter, 14, already fluent in caution, counted aloud to the cat so no one would hear her counting men. The cellar smelled of apples and damp wool. I had cleared a lane between the jars, plums, beans, pears, so the first 4 could lie down shoulder to shoulder, backs to the wall where the lime was still pale from last week. I set the rule before we descended. If I touch your sleeve, breathe like you're asleep. If I touch your wrist, breathe with me. If I touch your cheek, don't breathe at all. Eyes widened, then nodded. 12 little surrenders to a woman they'd met 5 minutes ago. On the table, I laid my tools, the ones that pass for kitchen things: twine, a half-dozen buttons, a stub of pencil, iodine in a teacup. Not clever, only loyal. I cut bread into republics and poured chicory that pretended to be coffee. The one with the torn flight suit thanked me in a whisper that came from 2 countries away. Save thank yous, I said, for when the sun is rude. From the lane, I heard the road think about visitors, the distant cough of a lorry, the nearer clop of a horse that disliked its rider. I blew out the lamp and let the house become a drawing of itself. In the dark, I could feel the crowding. 12 men, big with altitude and fear, fitting themselves into a farmhouse that had been built for cabbages and seasons, not for wars. I put my palm to the cellar door. It breathed back. I triaged with a mother's hands and a smuggler's schedule. Cuts first. Iodine painted on with a chicken feather so it wouldn't splash. I pressed lint pads I'd boiled at noon and tied them down with strips torn from a sheet I didn't like anyway. The Canadian with the cheek gash kept flinching at the word iodine until I said whiskey and he behaved. The radio man's wrist had ballooned purple. Fall from a hedge, he mimed. So I looped a strip of bark under the splint to keep the edges kind. You'll hate me for 12 breaths, I warned him, and he did, and then he didn't. We inventoried pockets the way priests inventory sins. Matches, maps printed so small they made me laugh, a rosary, 3 photographs of girls who would never meet, a fountain pen with a broken heart. One had pilfered a farmer's cap, another wore a blanket like a king who knew better. I took what glinted, metal is a tattletale under a torch, and replaced it with onion-smelling cord and buttons I could account for. When the patrol bangs on your door, a widow may have buttons. She does not have American dog tags. Upstairs, I set the table for 13 and then took away 5 plates. Windows like witnesses, you never let them see too many settings. I shifted the clock hands forward 6 minutes. When soldiers ask the time, give them a future that keeps them moving. My daughter laid 2 knives and 1 spoon. She knows the arithmetic of searches. Make your home poor without making it hungry. The orchard breathed damp through the keyhole. Somewhere a fox laughed at our seriousness. In the yard the pump creaked once. Wind or a man learning our gait. I touched my sleeve, breathe asleep. The knock came like a verdict, for knuckles and the afterthought of a thumb. Gendarmerie first, which is theater. The Germans follow with the review. I lifted the latch to the first step and left it there. The house sounds different with a half-open throat. We had reports, the sergeant announced to my doorway, as if the lane itself had called him from bed. We all have reports, I said, and let him smell cabbage and soap and the settled pride of a clean floor. They pushed past gently, the way men do when they want you to know they could have been unkind. Boots in my hallway. 2, then 4, then the pressed breath of a dog. I gave them the rooms in the order I had practiced. Kitchen, pots loud with innocence. Pantry, apples counting themselves. Parlor, the piano missing a key. Good, broken things comfort uniforms. I left the cellar for last. You never give a question its answer before it forgets what it asked. At the trapdoor, I coughed twice. The kind of cough housewives make at prices in the market, and the boys below flattened into stone. I lifted the hatch with a scold for the damp, held the lamp high, and showed them shells that had learned to be boring. Potatoes, I said, bored myself. The dog knows the first 2 steps and sneezed at lime. My daughter, bless her bright wickedness, dragged a chair across the floor to fetch a jar from high up, the scrape making a geography of noise behind the men. 2 heads turned. The dog chose jam over justice. They left me with a paper love note about curfew and an accusation that my goose squawked too late at night. I promised to correct the bird. When the yard gate clicked, I sank to the cool of the table and let my hands remember shaking. Then I went down, touched 12 sleeves, sleep, breathe, hold, and told them the only truth that mattered that night. You are mine until dawn. The first maps of the night came folded inside a loaf. The baker's boy set it down with a seriousness bread doesn't deserve and waited for me to scold him for the price. My scold was the receipt. In the heel, under the brown skin, greaseproof paper held a smear of pencil, grid squares with teeth marks where someone drew in a ditch. Not a chart, but a memory you could unfold. West of the beet fields, near the poplars that gossip in wind, 2 shoots seen, 1 flare, a sheep fence torn like an old hem. The boy took his coin, plus an onion for his mother, and left by the lane that never remembers faces. Crash night is half medicine, half calendar. I laid the paper on the kitchen table and pinned the corners as if it were cloth to be cut. My daughter set the chipped cup on the quadrant that meant patrol likely, the salt cellar on marsh, the spoon where the ditch ran shallow enough for a frightened man to decide he could jump it. We don't have compasses, we have habits. From the cupboard, I took the string we use for hams. Knots talk faster than whispers. 1 knot, barn. 2 hedge. 3 close together, dogs. I tied them on a loop and wore it like a woman checking her waist. Men arrived with more news disguised as excuses. A cow out, a boot found, a fence mended badly. They put their stories on the table with their caps and let me iron the creases out till a picture formed. 12, I counted again, not because the number changed, but because numbers are the only thing that behaves when the world doesn't. I drew our night's map with what we had, a saucer for the mill pond, a loaf end for the ridge, the blackened kettle for the forester's hut, and the cat, traitor, lying down exactly where the patrol would later stand and argue. Triage is route finding with pulse checks. I sent the 2 least broken airmen up to the garret, stairs that complain hide footsteps, and sat the worst of them at the kitchen table, back to the window, so his silhouette wouldn't read as foreign. The radio operator's ankle ballooned in his boot. I laced the leather looser, slid him a spoon to bite, and pulled with a mother's cruelty until heel and pride came free. Good lad, I said, which works on men up to 50. I wrapped the swelling with a cut of linen torn from a pillowcase my husband never liked, then tucked his dog tags into a jar of dried beans. If anyone shook the jar, prayer would sound like seeds. I marked tasks into the house the way you mark darts on a pattern. The kettle meant runner to the mill. The loaf heel meant barrow to the orchard gap. The salt meant river lookouts in the willows. My daughter tied her hair with the red ribbon that told the priest she'd be at the back door, not the front. She is 14 and thinks she's made of flint. I let her believe it until the world asks for steel. Outside, the lane rehearsed its lies. An owl too punctual, a cart that didn't belong to any field I knew, a whistle that might be wind or might be a boy learning to be a man badly. I opened the back door, let all the not hours in. Night smells, orchard damp, the lesson of distance, and listened to the far-off barking that says a stranger is arguing with hedges. I put my finger on the kitchen map where the spoon marked the ditch and moved it 2 finger widths. Ditches move when men are frightened. So do we. By the time the priest slipped in through the orchard gate, cassock hem muddy, breath like frost, the map on my table looked like a feast set for ghosts. He kissed my daughter's hair as if that were still allowed in a world that borrowed everything, then laid down the only luxury I ever ask of him, certainties. 2 in the forester's ditch, he said. 1 at the willow bend, 1 near the lime kiln. The dogs have the scent at the poplars, but they've not crossed the lane. He glanced at my spoon, moved 2 finger widths, and nodded approval like a schoolmaster passing a clever child. We set the night to choreography. The miller would light his damp lantern twice if the northern patrol doubled back. Once if the bridge lookout left his post, which he would after midnight to smoke and congratulate himself for not being caught. The midwife would cycle to the gendarmerie at past, complaining loudly about a breach that needed the sergeant's wife's help, an old trick that buys us the kind of minutes you can sew together into a corridor. I tied the hamstring into its loop and felt the knots like beads, praying my fingertips could remember what my mouth must not. Upstairs, floorboards rehearsed their arguments. 12 foreign bodies learn a house by error. I stood at the foot of the stairs with my hand on the banister and spoke the rules a second time, softer. If I touch your sleeve, breathe asleep. Your wrist, breathe with me. Your cheek, do not. The rules are cruel. Cruelty is sometimes a mother's talent. The ankle lad gritted once when the cramp returned. I pressed the pulse at his throat until it remembered the slow song. Before the priest left, I pinned a white napkin to his cassock lining. 3 stitches, close. Our sign for move the rendezvous downriver. They've stretched the net wrong, I told him. Let's swim where they think the water is shallow. He smiled the way only men who envy women's precision ever smile, with gratitude and a little fear, and went to fetch the part of God that walks by night. When the house was ours again, I tucked the crash map's grease paper under the stove tile and reset the kitchen to nothing special. 1 loaf halved, 1 pot simmering, 1 chair askew. I slid the jar of dog tags deeper behind the beans and set a Bible atop the sack of flour. Soldiers do not pick up Bibles in strange kitchens. They let them judge the housekeeping and move along. I wound the red ribbon out of my daughter's hair and replaced it with plain twine. She looked suddenly younger and more dangerous. At the door, I listened once more to the lane. The owl had given up pretending to be a man. A real whistle, far off, tried to sound like wind and failed. Good. False weather keeps fools outside. I took the kettle off the boil so the house would not seem eager, breathed smoke into my apron to smell like supper, and spoke to the cellar the way I speak to animals and saints. Hold, I said. The net is ours for 1 more throw. By 1 in the morning the house had learned to breathe around strangers. We opened the wall behind the flour bin, 3 boards set on false tongues, paint scuffed with a broom so it would look older than the lie. 2 at a time, I slid them into the swallow, shoulders angled, knees to chest, the way you put geese into baskets. Hands here, I whispered, guiding palms to the joists so their elbows wouldn't knock. I left a brick out near the floor to pull air, the little mercy that keeps men from panicking when the dark remembers it has teeth. In the barn, the granary ladder hit a second ladder, and that one led to a crawl space no taller than a prayer. We lined it with sacks that smelled of last year's barley. The smell tells dogs nothing to see here. I taught them farmer's stillness. If a mouse runs over your boot, you have no boot. One tried a joke about city men and hay. It died politely between us, and we let it stay dead. Outside, Frost began to lace the pump handle. Frost is our friend. Footprints lie more convincingly when everyone is careful. I scattered ash from the hearth across the yard to bruise the shine. Then I walked my own trail to the orchard and back, a widow who worries her trees. The patrol captain knows my widowhood by heart. I feed him my grief whenever he calls, and he takes it the way men take broth from women who terrify them without knowing why. Covers are costumes you must sweat into. I put the morning shawl on, smudged my cheek with stove black, and pricked my fingertip for a dot of blood at the nail. Honest faces need one true thing to hold all the lies together. Mine was the fear of losing children I had already risked. Covers work when they fit like old coats. That week the village had 2. A Saint's Day no one dared celebrate, and a funeral everyone attended with extra zeal. I chose the funeral. Grief feeds silence, and soldiers treat it like bad weather, annoying, but not worth arguing with. I hung my black dress by the stove so the house would smell of starch and smoke. I laid out a length of rosary on the table and rubbed the crucifix until it shone honest. The shine was for them. The prayer was for us. The child's fever story sat ready in the drawer with the recipes. A damp cloth on my daughter's forehead, a basin warm as a lie, a small cough practiced to sound brave. Fever buys you private rooms and closed doors. I set the kettle to sing too loudly, then moved it off the boil when boots came. Women fuss over steam, men forgive it. On the line I pegged 2 shirts and 1 sheet, all patched, respectable poor. I let 1 sleeve hang wrong as an alibi for being outside should anyone call me from the lane. Neighbors did their part without being asked. The widow across the road drew her curtains but left a finger's width open. That slit is a promise. I will see what you cannot afford to. The blacksmith's wife forgot her pail and crossed my yard for it. Plucking about prices, she placed an onion on my step as payment. Onion meant the captain is sober. Sober captains search longer. I shifted the clock forward another 4 minutes. When dusk remembered to be cold again, I smeared ash on the iron latch so a gloved hand would slip and a bare hand would smell like my fire. Honest faces grow from such small courtesies. A smear, a shine, a cough at the right price. The first sweep came soft, the kind meant to make you reveal yourself by pretending not to. 2 gendarmes and a farm boy with a lantern too bright for the oil it burned. They knocked with their hats still on, a tell that said we are practicing authority, not owning it. I gave them the kitchen, the pantry, the parlor with the piano that lies about middle C. I let them admire the crucifix's shine and scolded my daughter for leaving a comb on the table. Scolding reassures uniforms. It reminds them the world has smaller wars than theirs. One asked after my late husband in that bored way men use when they are looking for a door and hoping not to find one. The ground keeps him, I said. The boy lifted the lantern toward the flour bin, and I let my shoulders sag, then braced, as if ashamed of a mess I do not make. He liked that. I gave him something to forgive. He forgave it, and we kept our wall. When they left, I exhaled into the stairs and felt the men in the swallow exhale back. Wood remembers breath. I replaced the flour scoop at a careless angle. Carelessness is part of the costume, and reheated the kettle so the house would seem to resume a life it had never stopped living. In the barn, a mouse, paid nothing and worth everything, ran its route along the beam and convinced the dog that all interesting smells were old news. We held the house like that until the lane forgot us again. I let the shawl slip, wiped the ash from the latch, and counted the heartbeats between the last boot fall and our next move. 12 men do not belong in one house for long. Honest faces and false walls buy you hours, not dawns. The priest, the mill, and the midwife would have to take their turns in our night's arithmetic. We portioned the night like bread, a heel for the priest, the middle for the mill, the crust for the midwife, each piece feeding a different hunger. Father Andre came first, damp to the knees, cassock hem hiding a satchel that should have belonged to a clerk. He brought names without faces, baptismal extracts with dates bent to match jawlines, marriage entries for wives who did not exist, a death notice or 2 to lay over a man who needed to pass as a ghost. His penmanship never wavered. Saints help men with steady hands. At my table he laid the book that is not a book, leather covers, hollow. Inside, the parish seal wrapped in rag like a saint's bone. He dried it by the stove while I trimmed a stranger named Jean Martin into existence. 5 copies, ink blotted with the pad of my thumb the way real offices do when the stove smokes. We paired each paper with a story small enough to carry. Left-handed Mason, cousin near the border, mother who hates travel. Stories too grand attract questions, little lives past checkpoints. When the clock breathed twice, we moved to clothes. 12 Allied airmen make poor peasants, too tall, too clean at the collar, shoulders like churches. I brought out trousers that had known turnips and knees that remembered prayer. We rubbed seams with soap and a little bacon rind. Peasants smell like work. I showed them how to carry themselves smaller. One shoulder low when a sack rides there, head forward as if listening to weather, a hand in a pocket only when you own the street. Don't own our streets, I told them. Borrow them politely. Father Andre blessed the papers without making the sign, the way cautious men do when God must keep a low profile. He kissed my daughter's hair, left a crust of bread on the sill, payment and signal both, and went to wake the part of the village that sleeps lightest, millers and midwives. The river would take some, the road others. Paper would float all of them if it held. The mill speaks a language of patience, stone over stone, water insisting, flour like fog. We went by the orchard path where the nettles remember my ankles. The miller had left the lower sluice half open, our sign for safe to knock. Inside, the wheel murmured the way mothers do when they don't want to wake the house. He is a square man, the miller, with hands that measure weight better than numbers. He didn't greet the airmen. He greeted their boots, checking soles for city tread. Too honest, he said, and took a rasp to smooth away the factory's brag. We staged the barrow with sacks marked RY and 1 marked bones for the knacker. No one peers long into that. The first 4 went under the rye with canes of hollow reed at their mouths. The next 2 took the grain loft, trapdoor up, trapdoor down, while we argued loudly about moisture content so the knight would think we were exactly what we looked like. The miller's boy, a wren of a thing, darted between stones with a limp he had practiced for 2 years. Limps are tickets in this district. People step aside for you and forget your face. He stubbed a toe on purpose. The curse he chose, soft, local, was a password of belonging. Flour finds everything. I dusted the men's shoulders and hair until they became ghosts of work. One reached for a handkerchief, and I slapped his wrist like a mother at Massachusetts. Sneezing is a language, I said. Tonight we speak river. He swallowed both the sneeze and his pride. We practiced the mill's music, the scrape, the lift, the sigh, then turned to the door that opens onto water. The boat waited under willow shadow, flat-bottomed, sullen as a mule. The miller showed me his ledger, columns of grain that also measured favors. Against our names, he drew a line longer than my finger. Pay me with the bridge, he said, and we already had. I kissed his cheek as if we were cousins and left him to guard the music that hides more men than walls do. If the mill is patience, the midwife is nerve. She bicycled out of the fog with her bag clacking like crockery, scarf tied in a knot that meant house to house tonight. Her profession is the last invader soldier's respect. Even drunks make corridors for her. She walked straight into my kitchen, opened the bag, and set out her theater. Linen, carbolic, a folded sheet with a red corner. Under the sheet, papers. Under the papers, razors. Under the razors, hope. We paired each man with a woman's instruction. You there, become a brother sent for a mother. Grief makes people stupid. They won't study your face. You, keep your mouth shut when the bell strikes. Our church rings slow, and it will sell your accent. You, walk with the ache of a bad hip. War takes symmetry from villages. She showed them how to carry a pail without spilling like a man who's done it all his life, and how to look at dogs without looking like meat. When the sergeant's name came up, she laughed the laugh that has delivered half our valley. He weeps at breeches, she said. He'll stand outside a door forever if he thinks a child is being turned. Make noise. We dressed them for the road. Caps low, collars frayed, buttons missing on purpose. She rubbed garlic on their palms and a smear of goose fat behind each ear, contadini cologne. Over uniforms too stubborn to abandon, we pulled sweaters like surrender. I wrote names on scraps for the staging points. Broommaker, aunt by the ford, a widow who bakes bread that forgives. Each scrap folded to the size of courage. I tucked them into hatbands and behind labels where laundry won't look. Before she left, the midwife pressed 3 little packets into my hand. Powder's the color of resignation. For dogs, she said, or for men who become dogs. I slid them into the flour bin's false bottom and prayed to use none. She kissed my daughter's cheek, then pinched it hard enough to bring tears for practice. You cry beautifully, she said. My girl rolled her eyes and then hid her smile the way you hide a candle in a bombing, close to the chest, ready to show someone worth saving. By 2 the house was a timetable. The priest would take 2 by the cemetery path. The mill would float 4 under sacks. The midwife would knit the rest through alley and yard, behind shutters that had been briefed by 30 years of babies. I tied the last knot in my hamstring and looped it around my wrist. 12 men become 6 pairs. 6 become 3. 3 become 2. 2 is the number the night forgives. The second knock of the night carried a different grammar. No afterthought of a thumb, just 4 hard syllables that wanted to be the last word. The dog in the next yard answered late. Someone had walked him to boredom. I slid the bolt back to its catch, not enough to free the door, just enough to let the house breathe as if it were sleeping. My daughter took her cue and began to cough, small at first, then with a bravery that would earn her heaven if there were any justice left in it. Open, the voice said, and the door understood before my hands did. Gendarmerie again, but polished and with a shadow behind the uniforms that didn't belong to our town. The German stepped over the sill without being invited. He was the sort who lets leather announce him. His coat held rein as if it had learned to enjoy the weight. The sergeant followed with his notebook and the pen he never inks in front of women. The boy with the lantern was gone, replaced by a dog that cataloged my air and found onions. The German looked everywhere except at me. Men like that trust corners more than faces. He lifted the pot lid, held his palm over the steam, and let the kitchen tell him whether it believed its own story. "Child sick," I said, in the tone of a woman who has learned the schedule of fevers better than trains. My girl coughed on cue, then whimpered as if embarrassed by her body. The sergeant softened half a millimeter. The German did not. They took the rooms like shelves in a storeroom, top to bottom, inventorying cleanliness as if it were treason. The pantry performed respectably. The parlor forgave them their boots. The dog found the flour bin and sneezed again. Ash on the latch has its uses, so does lime. "Cellar," the German said without asking. And because refusal is a confession, I went first down the creaking steps with my lamp high, holding fear like an egg I could not afford to drop. The trap for the swallow was set. 3 boards seated, 1 shy. The brick for air, an honest mouthful. I let the lamp pause on the apple jars until the flame fluttered like a nervous ant, and then guided the light toward the potato sacks, the ones my hands had rolled over a dozen sleeping ribs. The dog sniffed and lost interest. Flour ghosts and potatoes talk more convincingly than men do. Behind me, the German stayed still in the middle of the stairs, listening the way woodsmen listen for deer, chasing not sounds but the places where sounds refuse to be. The house held its breath with the discipline of a choir. My fingers found the knot of my hamstring and pressed the bead that meant do not. "Too tidy," he said at last, which is a complaint uniforms make when they begin to doubt their own authority. I tipped a sack, let potatoes roll and thud down the last step and bounce shamefully into corners, and then scolded my dead husband out loud for teaching me to stack them wrong. The sergeant wrote untidy cellar in a notebook he would never read again. The dog, satisfied by gravity's honesty, sat. Upstairs, the German discovered my piano and our lie about middle C. He struck the keys like a man solving a lock and winced when the false note bit him. "Tuning?" he asked, looking at the wood instead of me. "Lost tuner to the war," I said, like anyone useful. The sergeant smirked then, quietly, the way men do when a woman says something dangerous in a tone that sounds like laundry. The German lifted the lid, examined the hammers as if sabotage could be sanded into felt, and found nothing but dust that told the truth. Poor, sad, played by children. He tried the bedroom next, the poor woman's room with its respectable poverty. 2 blouses on a nail, 1 dress under repair, the child's basin still warm with the performance of fever. He touched the basin with his knuckle and left no steam print. I had moved it off the stove in time. He bent over my work basket and fished up the red ribbon I had swapped for twine. It is astonishing how sinless objects become evidence when held by suspicion. He lifted his eyebrows at the color. Red always offends men who prefer their uniforms to be the loudest thing in a room, and then let it drop, bored by the domesticity he had come to despise. The sergeant asked for water, and I made him pour it himself. Soldiers who pour water speak less. While he drank, I let a chair complain under me as I rested my back. The scrape of its feet on the tile is a decoy for other noises houses make when they remember they are full. In the granary a sack settled. In the wall, wood ticked as if it were cooling. Upstairs, a floorboard spoke a single syllable and then repented. The German's head turned at each sound and then away. A house with children is a dictionary of harmless noises. I am fluent. He came back to the kitchen and rearranged the world with his eyes. "You had visitors," he said. I smiled at the clock as if it had overcooked my day. "Funeral women," I answered. We sat on our hands and talked about butter. The sergeant wrote funeral women in his book. Perhaps he will tally us someday and declare us an army. The German drifted to the back door, opened it to the orchard, and let the night move over his face. Orchard air is honest, damp, cold, a hint of fox and rot. It told him nothing he could write down. He turned on his heel with a patience that had not yet learned humility. "There are parachutists," he said, aiming the word at my daughter the way men aim cups to see if hands will shake. "We found silk." I covered my mouth like a woman who still remembers what a wedding night costs. "Silk?" I said, with the quiet envy of a poor widow. "You bring me a bolt. I'll make your wife a blouse and your mistress a sin." The sergeant made a sound that wanted to be a cough and wasn't. The German smiled with half his mouth and none of his soul. They left with the professional reluctance of men who know their night will go worse somewhere else. On the threshold, the German paused, turned his head the way dogs do when deciding whether to forgive a stranger, and then flicked 2 fingers at the sergeant. "Curfew enforced." He did not look back. The dog did. Dogs keep better books than men. When the gate clicked, the house did not cheer. It let air return to rooms like water returning to banks after a self-important flood. I waited for the second click, the one the latch makes when the man at the end of the line remembers he is the last, and then for the count of 60 that we have used since my girl was 8 and learned to measure fear in heartbeats. At 59, I sent the smallest noise down the cellar stair. The scratch of a match struck and then smothered. The swallow exhaled in 12 different dialects of relief. I opened the wall the width of a shoulder and fed in a cup of water 2 pieces of bread, a slice of apple for the man whose breath had told me sugar makes his heart behave. I touched sleeves, wrists, a cheek only once when a cramp tried to betray a man's ribs. Breathe like a widow, I whispered. Small. On purpose. Upstairs, I eased the garret door and let out 2 of the tall ones in their peasant coats. We reset the house while they stood in the shadow between kitchen and hall, the safest place because it is the one no one looks at long. The priest returned first, wet as a river confession. He tapped twice, then once, then twice again. The pattern for company just left. I trusted the door with him. Doors like priests and priests like doors. The mill sent its wren boy with a sack of flour cut wrong, a slit that meant ready at the sluice. The midwife passed in the lane, coughing the breech cough that keeps sober captains at arm's length, and let a spoon fall from her bag. I picked it up. On the handle a nick glinted. Bridge guard moved to the fort. The night had edited itself in our favor. We moved on the count we had set with the church bell. At the next half hour, 2 would go by the cemetery path with Father Andre. At the hour, for under sacks to the willow scow. At the hour and a quarter, 2 with the midwife through shutters and courtyards where babies had taught men to whisper. The last 4 would wait for the lane to change its mind about weather and for the German to decide he preferred the warm end of the town. Before we parted the first pair from the house, I made them repeat my grammar in English learned badly from school books and better from airmen. Sleeve, sleep. Wrist, breathe with you. Cheek, don't breathe. They spoke it back to me like catechism. I put my palm against each of their chests the way I do with calves about to learn what a river is. Felt lungs remember discipline, and let them have the night. The door's last inch is the most dangerous in the world. I opened it on my fingertip, let the orchard's cold argue with our heat, and slipped them into the argument. Leaves lied for us. The mill will took the sentence and finished it underwater. Back in the kitchen, I set the clock ahead 2 more minutes. Let the Germans chase tomorrow while we live in now. I kissed my daughter's temple and tasted salt and ash and pride. Again, she said, not asking. Again, I answered, because that is the vow and the wage. Water keeps secrets better than walls if you learn its grammar. At the mill sluiced the wheel side like an old ant, and the flat-bottomed skiff waited with sacks stenciled RY and bones stacked to make a plausible lie. The first pair climbed in on my count. Knee, hand, breath, then slid under the rye, reeds at their mouths like boys playing explorers until they remembered explorers didn't shiver. I tucked sacking at their temples to break echo. Fear gets loud in wood. The miller's wren boy pulled us off, face slack with the practiced boredom that buys you distance. I sat stern with my shawl pulled low, a widow delivering flour to a baker who cheats on his weights. The moon was a thin coin you couldn't spend. Clouds, our good bankers, hid it when we passed the open bend. We learned the river's noises by season. Spring gossips, summer boasts, autumn hums. Tonight it whispered, the way children whisper to be caught and forgiven. At the willow reach we rehearsed our coughs. The midwife's breech cough that closes doors, my widow's marrow-deep one that says I will not waste your time. If a challenge came from the bank, we would be women interrupting men, which is almost a respectable crime. The wren boy tapped the pole twice against the hull, our hush for distance. Then once more, and I felt the boat shift under a new weight. Rain beginning. Good. Rain at its footprints and memory both. Halfway to the ford, we hit the slow water where silt tells you every wrong thing you've ever tried to hide. The sacks creaked as if deciding to speak. I pressed my palm flat on the topmost and felt a skull's worth of heat under rye. Breathe like church. I murmured to the bag, and the skull's heat slowed. On the north bank, the willow branches combed our backs like fingers that wanted a confession. I gave them the names of the saints I still trusted: barley, stone, rope. The checkpoint at the ford was a habit more than an institution. Two men who liked the feeling of being a gate, one lantern too dim, a crayford leaning. Tonight a third shadow leaned with them, the sort of stillness that means orders from somewhere with stairs. We grounded by the gravel bar upstream and let the current slide us sideways like a compliment you didn't want. The wren boy whistled once. Nightjar, not perfect, perfect enough, and a figure detached from the alder shade on our side. The midwife, hair tucked, bag clacking like crockery. She arrived with outrage, the kind you can ladle. "You there," she called across the water. "Do you prefer a live child or a dead shift?" Men move aside for sentences like that even when they don't believe in babies. She slapped the bag on the pole bridge and ran through her drama. Breach, stuck, husband useless, while I pawed through the sacks as if I had lost patience with flour. The shadow with orders took one offended step onto the planks, then another, careful with the wet. He peered into our boat and saw what we had prepared for him. 2 torn open sacks of rye, a careless scatter of grain, and my widow face daring him to make hunger worse. He chose sanity and scowled instead. "Name," he said. I gave him one that belonged to my mother's cousin and put the vowel in the place our valley keeps it. "Permit," he said. I showed him a paper stamped 3 years ago and folded to look new. He frowned at the date, then at the sky, then at the midwife who had upgraded to threats only saints may utter. A gust treated his lantern like an idea it didn't respect, and the light thinned enough for us to become less interesting. He waved us through with the impatience of a man who prefers warmth to thoroughness. The midwife crossed last, trod on his pride with her heel, thanked no one. We pulled off as if insult had weight. Downstream, the river widened into the silted lagoon where frogs hold their municipal meetings. The wren boy, small as a question, pointed his chin at the left bank, the cut to the backwater that keeps boats from silhouettes. I felt the sack shift under my palm. One of the men sneezed like a man who remembered city dust. I pinched the sacking quick where it billowed and whispered the only benediction the river understands. Later. Beyond the lagoon, the banks fell away into reed and fog, and the skiff learned to float quieter. We slid into the mill's lower reach where the wheel's downstream cousin dozes, and I counted the strokes to the landing where the alder roots hold a step the river can't steal. 2 knocks under the gunwale. Our greeting, and the bank answered with 1 knock, then the soft rattle of chain laid down without hurry. The ferryman is a man I trust exactly as far as his debts reach. Tonight they reached to my doorstep. We all floated as we had loaded, knee, hand, breath. The first pair rose from flour like apparitions with good prospects. I brushed them fast, flour in hair, sleeves seemed tugged crooked, cap brimmed down, and handed each a crumb of garlic for the mouth. In the huts beyond the marsh, garlic is a passport. The wren boy scuffed the landing with his pole to smear the story our boots would try to tell. Mud repeats slander if you let it. From here, I told the pair, you are cousins walking to a widow with geese. If stopped, speak with your shoulders. If a dog looks too clever, let your hands find your pockets and then not use them. They listen the way boys listen on cliffs. The midwife's silhouette waited at the dike gate, already smaller than any question. She took the first 2 as if they were overdue babies and disappeared them into the texture of the marsh. We went back twice more, trading sacks for men and men for shadows, until the skiff rode high and honest. On the last run, rain fattened into work. The Ford's lantern blew to a sulk. Somewhere behind us a car coughed into life. Enough night left, I told the river, and it agreed with a nudge on the stern that set us snug to the landing as if we were always meant to be there. By the time we shouldered the last flour sack into the mill, now genuinely heavier, the river had swallowed our wake and practiced innocence on its surface. I kissed the wren boy's hair, left a coin in the crack he pretends not to know about, and took the orchard path home with my shawl over the basket like weather over fields. 12 were no longer 12. The number had learned to walk in smaller sums. That is how you teach a night to carry weight. Stations are theaters that pretend to be clocks. Ours kept bad time on purpose. Platform lamps feathered with moths. A station master who drank his watch 10 minutes slow so the Germans would never quite agree with his platforms. We made use of that disagreement. By 3, the river pairs had grown into 3 couples of men who walked like cousins. Caps low, collars honest with wear, garlic on their breath, and rain dealing the cards. I packed their pockets with paper moons. Work permits cut on curves that made a uniformed I forgive the date at a glance. Curves flatter suspicion, straight lines invite rulers. The priest's seal had dried into the fibers as if the paper had slept with it for years. Over each stamp, I pressed a coin under a damp cloth to leave the ghost of a ring, what bureaucrats call deskware. Deskware is faith for men who don't believe in saints. We rehearsed the railway's grammar at the goods yard fence. If a lamp hesitates, I told them, you are men who have missed trains before. Stand together, but not like soldiers. One speaks, one nods, one looks bored. I showed them the local way to hold a ticket between two fingers, flat, not pinched, because pinched says city and city breeds questions. The tall one learned to bend at the knees when a porter passes. Height is a dialect the Germans understand too well. The midwife slipped me a strip of blanket stitched with a sloppy X, her sign that the dormitory matron had agreed to forget which beds had been used. We would buy 3 hours of anonymity with a sack of flour and a story about a cousin's widow. 3 hours is enough if you spend it in small coins. A doze, a warm cheek on a sleeve, a breath that learns another man's rhythm. Trains hide people badly. People hide themselves well if they are allowed to yawn. The station master's cat chose our side. She wound around the tall one's calves and gave him a citizen's scent. Animals are better forgeries than paper. I sent the first couple to the parcels window. Locals queue there when they can't face the ticket clerk's wife, and put a loaf end in the tall one's pocket so his hands would remember to be clumsy. Clumsy men drop crumbs. Crumbs write small poems that say not a soldier. A felgendarm in the collar chain stood under the timetable as if the trains asked his permission to exist. He tapped the metal crescent against his chest. Men who enjoy noise rarely enjoy work. The midwife floated past him with a basket that smelled of boiled sheets in judgment. She let the basket brush his knee. He recoiled, human at last. In the shadow that made, our first pair slid into the stairwell to the dormitory, caps in hands, faces arranged like sons apologizing for success. On the platform, a boy with a red cap, porter, brave because of his insignificance, took the second pair's bundles and asked, in our language and his song, whether they were from the marsh. From the geese. They answered, which is not an answer unless you are local, and then it is everything. He tipped his cap toward the last carriage of the 410, the one that sleeps longer than ticket inspectors and stops twice where the lamps forget to wake. He dusted a seat with a diligence that would have shamed any grandmother and left a folded rag on the bench. In the rag, a heel of cheese, his investment in a story he would tell his own lungs someday. I took the goods office steps 2 at a time and bumped the station master's door with my hip as if it were my house. He scowled at being owned and then softened when I set flour on his desk. Your clock is ill, I said. We moved its hands together. 8 minutes now, not 6. Enough to make the German's pocket watch grow lonely. He stamped the permits without reading them, the way men stamp when flour is in the room. Deskware, seal, lateness, cheese, cat. The theater was full. The last pair had to learn to vanish in a crowd of exactly 5. 2 gendarmes on a smoke break, a girl in a coat that promised a better year, and an old man carrying a clock without hands. Follow the clock, I told them. It knows the timetable better than any of us. The old man is my neighbor in dignity. He walks like a bell with its tongue removed. I put 1 airman on each side of him, gave one the ticket, the other the basket, and told them to attend to his silences. On the stairs to the dormitory, the matron counted linen like a miser, her mouth moving around numbers that meant I see you and I will remember to forget you. The beds were already turned with the blanket fold that signals occupied by men who snore like bridges. Bridges snore in this town. Men are expected to keep up. The first pair sank with the gratefulness of the nearly visible and did not sleep, which is as good as sleeping when you need the world to slide past without noticing. We staged the final crossing under the station lamps. The felgendarm adjusted his crescent, the chain clinked like an hour striking, and the station master announced a delay, as if delays were wallpaper. The clock without hands led our last 2 past the ticket taker with a nod that said we have shared funerals. Funerals spin suspicion like coins. Everyone becomes poor and kind for 1 measured minute. The ticket taker punched paper moons with a distracted dignity and waved them into a carriage where a woman snored with her mouth open, our best guardian. On the platform edge, I rubbed my washer talisman and watched the 4 10-inhale men who were learning to be smaller than trains. When it pulled away, the tail lamp winked a blessing that might have been physics and might have been permission. We were down to 4, 2 in dormitory shadows, 2 already swallowed by timetable, and a house that still held 8 plates too few on the shelf. The river had done its part. The railway had learned its lines. Dawn wanted receipts. Dawn arrives like an accountant. She wants numbers to agree. I walked home by the orchard path with the washer in my fist and the smell of damp timetables on my shawl. The pump handle wore a fringe of rhyme. Rhyme is morning's handwriting. My gate latch had its usual grammar. Click, pause, click. The pause longer than a stranger would leave it. Inside, the house looked like a woman who had not slept because she had not slept. I set the kettle on the stove and let its lid chatter like gossip so the lane would do the rest. First came the priest, hat in hand, cassock hem clean. A good sign. Too little mud means too much conversation. 2 at St. Martin's Yard, he said, lighting candles for a grandmother no one will miss. You put a crust on the sill and didn't bless me, which is how you bless a woman like me when walls have ears. The mill sent the wren boy with flour on his nose and no limp. He forgets to keep it when he is proud. For past the eel traps, he chirked, and the ferryman says you owe him your scowl. I paid him with a sweet and the promise of a story when he is old enough to know which parts are lies. The midwife didn't knock. She rearranged my kitchen like a storm. Basin to the stove, chair to the draft, a towel folded as if someone had cried there last night. 2 to the dormitory, she reported, snoring as if paid by the note. 1 more pair to the aunt by the ford. Her goose will earn her sainthood, and the last 2 chose the clock without hands and made it keep promise. She pressed my knuckles, turned them palm up, and set in them a small, hard thing wrapped in paper. It was a button, not ours. For your collection, she said, from a man who said thank you without saying it. We sat and counted in the language that cannot be written. 6, then 8, then 10. 10 is not 12, but it is the kind of almost you make a table with. The last 2 were arithmetic's insult and its dare. They would need the railway's second chance or the wood's third path. I brewed courage, thin as tea, and called my daughter down from the garret. She came like Dawn's accomplice, eyes raw with useful tears. Again, she asked, and I loved her for asking the question men usually answer for us. We reclaimed the house from its night self. Flour back in a trustworthy bin, false wall repainted with broom bristle patience, chairs placed at the angles women use when they expect visitors who judge. I fetched the jar of beans. Dog tags clicked like guilty rosaries. 2 we kept. No names, just metal that proves a man was a son. The rest would travel folded into a priest's ledger, then farther, then home, shoved across a kitchen table while someone learned to breathe 3 new kinds of relief. The German returned at the worst possible moment, which is to say, a perfect one. He came with sunrise behind him, trying to make his silhouette into a sermon. He picked up the ladle, the spoon, my husband's photograph, set each down with a care that said he would rather break people than things. We will search again, he announced to the room, as if oak and iron needed warning. Then you will eat, I replied, and put a heel of bread on the table with the kind of authority grandmothers use. He looked at the bread, at my hands, at the idea of being a son, and chose not to be one. Later, he said, they made a smaller mess this time. Night purges, day arranges. The dog remembered ash and jam and judged me unremarkable. The German's eyes kept doing that thing wolves' eyes do when they smell a smarter animal. They asked the house a question and disliked the answer. He paused at the piano, struck middle C, and almost smiled when it lied to him again. It is important to let your enemies keep a few illusions. It keeps them moving. At the door he met the priest. 2 uniforms, 2 collars, 2 ceremonies of power. They performed a polite war, and I ladled chicory into mugs like priests pour mercy. The priest won, as he always does when he remembers to be stubborn. He nodded at the German's boots as if they had tracked in rain, which they had, and not grief, which they would. The German left us a notice. New curfew spoke at 9, fines, inspections, the paper's favored verbs. I tacked it to the lintel with a pin, because women make do with the tools men ignore, and because pins hold up empires longer than proclamations do. The last 2 came home on the wrong train and the right timing. They slipped into the yard at the hour even dogs nap, the margin between patrol shifts when uniforms believe in sandwiches. One had lost his cap and found a farmer's. The other had learned the trick of being forgettable. I fed them stew that had boiled all night and the lie that they looked local. Men crossed borders for a second serving of that lie. We finished what the dark had started. Papers paired to faces, collars rubbed with garlic and humility, a practice at standing like men who own only Sunday suits. The midwife chose their route with the cruelty of experience. Through the tannery, she decreed, past the vats, up the stairs that have learned to cry. The tannery is a passport. Uniforms hate the smell, and righteous men refuse to look where skins become new names. She set a dab of the tannery's perfume on their boots and told them to walk like fathers late to a birth. By noon, 12 had become 12 again, not in my cellar, never again in my cellar, but in a moving sentence the valley would finish for us. Mill, marsh, station, tannery, dormitory, road. I wrote nothing. I own nothing. I kept a washer, a wall that lies in my favor, and a daughter who can cough on command and laugh when she is allowed. When the last pair stepped through the tannery gate, I let myself sit. I pressed my palms flat on the table and told the wood the truth I could not tell a soul. I am tired down to places below bone. The table bore it, as tables do. On the sill, the priest's crust had gone hard. I broke it in two and left half there for the next woman who would need to remember how a house holds 12 men without mentioning a single name. If they ever ask me, years from now, how we did it, I will say this. We divided the night into sums the world could not count. We taught boots to learn our floors, and dogs to believe our flour, and men to breathe like widows. And when dawn demanded receipts, we gave her bread and buttons and the clock without hands.